Not too long ago, I found myself getting back into Pokemon. I used to sort of be into it when I was about the age of 11, and I remember how I used to play an oldish Pokemon card game that I don't recall the name of. But what I do remember is how every time I opened it to play, it would keep starting with its really long, unskippable tutorial on how to play. But anyway, I felt like playing an actual Pokemon game to see what it was like. And I did not want to play any of the newer ones, I mean the older ones. I went into Google to try and find what I could, and with little digging, I found out there was a free online emulator for Pokemon Ruby, specifically for PC, Windows 10. I wanted to give it a shot, but because PC and Game Boy Advance controls are completely different from each other, I assumed there would be some of the buttons that wouldn't work. Of course, it was off to a third-party website, since I doubt Nintendo would ever make those really old games be brought back and put into PC, let alone for free. You know how Nintendo is with copyright. While I was on my search though, I found that there was a few small clickable links in the website while I accidentally clicked. I looked at the names though, and apparently there was a downloadable .zip file that were mods that came along with it. I was already quite curious, so I looked at a few of them. Some of them just had weird file names that were mixtures of letters and numbers, but one of them particularly caught my eye, which was the one that was called Banette_mod.zip, which I found intriguing since Banette was a Pokemon, so I assumed this mod revolved around it. Maybe it's a skin mod. I was skeptical, but I downloaded it anyways. Once I was finished, the pop-up in the top right corner of my browser told me that it was done downloading. I arranged the files together as needed, which took a little longer than I anticipated. The notepad file that came with the mod that was labeled instructions was a little vague in some parts of the explanation, but in the end I was able to make it work. I booted up the game and crossed my fingers. I sighed in relief when the game started up normally. I was just hoping that the more important main controls would work so I wouldn't have awful restrictions on what I can and can't do. I pressed enter, and there wasn't really anything fancy after that. It just cut right to the chase, and I was in the game. Although, what I found interesting was the fact that it didn't give me an option to choose my trainer or name. I opened up my stats, or whatever the option was called. My display name strangely had nothing on it, and the sprite for the trainer wore a yellow and red jacket with matching shoes, a black bodysuit, and white fluffy hair. What I found particularly interesting was instead of the common blank same-face syndrome on them, which I usually see on the trainers, they had tired-looking, half-lidded eyes and wore a devious smirk. I chuckled a little, already feeling this blank character starting to grow on me. I've never actually seen this trainer before, so I thought this was just a mod-exclusive character. But then again, I'm not familiar with every single Pokemon trainer, so I can't really say. When I looked at my ID, I also saw that I already had a team. It consisted of a level 35 Quilava, level 24 Eevee, level 29 Kirlia, level 24 Ghastly, level 32 Mawile, and level 24 Skitty, all of which were pretty close to evolving. Well, for the ones that do evolve anyways. The game didn't start how I expected it to, so I guess the starter was already chosen, which was Cyndaquil. Normally when it came to choosing starters, I would commonly choose Charmander, but Quilava is alright too. Is Cyndaquil even a choice for a starter in the original Pokemon Ruby? I didn't know, but that didn't matter to me right now. I just wanted to figure out where exactly I was in the game. I tried using WASD to walk, but it didn't work. I used the arrow keys, and I was happy to see the little character sprite walking around. I also can't really say that there was anything too odd so far. I just wish that I could change my name, but that's alright, I guess. It's not a big deal. As I walked around a little, I didn't really see much going on. I seemed to be in a small town with little houses and green grass everywhere. I tried interacting with the small houses, or any object in sight for that matter, and it took me a little bit to figure out what button it was to do so, which was E. There wasn't much in that the game had to say about the objects, like the sign for example, "Welcome to 5 semicolons." That's a weird name. I interacted with it a couple more times, but stopped when I realized it wasn't going to change. I shrugged it off. It probably didn't mean anything significant, so I kept exploring. I interacted with a few of the house's doors, but none of them really showed me any dialogue. After that, though, I continued looking around. I walked around a little bit more, not finding anything too interesting. In the tall grass where wild Pokemon encounters were available, it was mostly Oddishes, Deduos, Pidgeots, etc. The area I was in was pretty small, so my exploration there ended quickly when the more I checked different areas of it, the more familiar it was to me. I meandered more until I could find more areas to explore, and came across a pathway, which, of course, I walked up to. My screen faded black and faded back into the game. And then I was in what was labeled the Route 1. The surrounding area was a smooth dirt-covered pathway with flowers growing on one side, which would be to the left of where the trainer was facing. She was facing to the right. There was a few houses in the background as well, and some tall grass here and there. After walking around a little, suddenly blank little sprites had come up to an abrupt halt, and the Pokemon Battle SFX ran in my headphones. I stumbled across a wild level 13 Gulpin. I chose my first move as making Quilava use Tackle, since I wanted to get this Pokemon at low health. I planned to catch this Pokemon. Quilava did so, and Gulpin's health went down by a lot, like I almost accidentally killed it. I let Gulpin take his turns before I opened my bag to grab a Pokeball. In the bag, I noticed that there weren't that many normal Pokeballs, but a bunch of Great Balls. Just in case, I grabbed a Great Ball and gave it a go. I ended up catching it, and it was transferred to Box 1. I wandered in the tall grass more, looking for more Pokemon to catch, all of which were either Gulpins, Blossoms, or Chikorritas. I looked for other places to search once I realized that those weren't the only 3 Pokemon in the area. I went down the trail more and turned left, which was up to my point of view. I saw more houses, and I walked and saw if I can interact with them, but I couldn't. It said nothing. I walked back to where I came and stepped in the tall grass again, and like expected, I was pulled into another wild Pokemon battle. I was expecting something like Chikorita or whatever, but oddly it wasn't. It was Banette. This slightly intrigued me, since I wasn't in any particular spooky-like area. Maybe this is why the mod's file name was banette_mod.zip. Do you randomly encounter Banettes like this in the wild when you download this mod? However, this Banette did not quite look like how I remembered. I recognized it as looking more like the Mega Banette, but it was much more saturated in red and yellow. It strained my eyes looking at it for too long. It also looked more sinister. Its eyes were fire truck red and had these tiny yellow specks for pupils. It was staring intensely at Ghosty. Its stare was so intense, the way its eyes were wide, and it would just barely move like a wild animal. Well, this is certainly unexpected. My character sent out their first Pokemon, Quilava, and disappeared from sight. Maybe it's a rare Pokemon in this mod, I wasn't sure. However, I tried choosing the runaway option, but it didn't do anything. At first I thought it was my sticky keys, though I realized I was wrong when I tried hitting it a few more times. I sigh in slight irritation and resort to battling it until it faints. Quilava and the weird-looking Banette exchanged a few attacks, and surprisingly, the Banette wasn't all that strong. It just kept on using Knockoff. That can't be the only move it has, right? You'd think for Mega Banette it would be much stronger. But I was wrong. After what felt about 3 minutes, the Banette's HP was finally low enough for Quilava to finish it off with one more tackle. At this rate, I was relieved. I was starting to get bored with this Banette. I wanted to keep exploring without any more interruptions, and hopefully beat a gym leader or two. But before that could happen, unexpectedly, the narration said, Banette used Destiny Bond. I recognized Destiny Bond being the infamous move that takes down the user's enemy with it if it faints. Very annoying. I was snapped out of that train of thought when my emulator started stuttering, like the program was too large for my PC to handle. My computer's fans blew a little harder, and I couldn't really do much but watch for what would happen next. I really did want to do something, like leave the battle, but I still couldn't. Without warning, I heard an 8-bit high-pitched screech that blared in my ears from my headphones. My trainer and the Mega Banette's figures became 2 black silhouettes as the background flashed neon red and yellow, before my computer completely black-screened. Before my computer black-screened, blank silhouette looked like they were being shocked, strained with their mouth wide open. Windows has shut down to prevent further damage to your computer. I practically threw my headphones. It hurt like a bitch. I rubbed my ears with my palms, wincing. After a few minutes, once my ears stopped hurting enough, I looked at my PC. I was freaked out and confused. I've heard of games that close by themselves, but ones that do that intentionally scare you. I've also ran games in the past that made my computer blue screen, but it has never black screened before. I only had the emulator running, no other active program running in the background. Maybe I downloaded a virus, I thought, in spite of myself. I quickly booted up my computer again, and waited impatiently. As soon as that was done, I checked my task manager to close any backgrounds and programs running. I'll admit, my heart rate was running a little faster than normal. It felt like my heart was punching me from the inside, wanting out. I could feel my blood pumping, pulsing from the scare. Eventually it stopped though, and I restarted the game. I don't know why, but I felt really curious as to what would happen next. Realistically, I should focus on if the emulator or mod really was a virus, but I really wanted to know what would happen next. A troubleshoot can wait. Once I was in, any progress made in Route 1 seems to have been lost. I came to this conclusion because I was back to the other area, the town that was called 5 Colons, apparently. I sighed in mild irritation, but at least there wasn't too much progress that was lost. I wasn't too far into the game. Then, out of nowhere, my Pokemon evolved. Eevee evolved into Umbreon, Kirlia evolved into Gardevoir, Ghastly evolved into Haunter, Mawile grew to level 68, Skitty evolved into Delcatty. It was always so satisfying seeing my Pokemon evolve, but I found it weird that my last battle must have leveled up my Pokemon, but I thought my progress was lost. Now I'm lost. As I was heading back to Route 1, I accidentally walked into the tall grass again. Suddenly blank stopped in their tracks once again, and the music sound effect that played before a Pokemon battle blared in my ears again. I had encountered a wild Oddish. However, I didn't see Ghosty send out any Pokemon. Instead, they were just standing there, holding a Pokeball. No animation or anything. I shrugged it off, assuming it was either the emulator or the mod goofing up the game. I tried running away again since it was sort of lower level than other wild Pokemon I've encountered, and I didn't really care too much for Oddish. Once I tried using that option again, though, it wouldn't budge. Not this again. I started to feel a little bit more weirded out. This battle seemed more buggy than any other battles I've encountered since that fucked up looking Mega Banette. I quickly chose to switch my Pokemon, and I checked Gardevoir to see if she had Teleport. Fortunately, however, she didn't. That would have been really useful. That would be very, very great right now, I thought, sighing as my eyebrows scrunched together. Oddish used Absorb. My eyes darted back to my computer screen. Weird, I didn't even make a move yet. Unless me looking at my Pokemon counted as one? My health went down, but when I saw it go down, I noticed that my name was different. When I read it, my heart rate increased and my mouth agape. Banette. I couldn't help but stare at the name in disbelief. There's no way that was coincidental. I felt like it would have been a little more believable if the Oddish's name were accidentally Banette, since Banette was my previous opponent and maybe the game had forgotten to change it. But this time, it was the name on my side. Blank still stood there, motionless. I was very dumbfounded, but I continued the battle anyway. But when I chose the attack option, I didn't recognize them as moves I remember having. There were only two. Knockoff and Destiny Bond. I sighed in astonishment when I remembered that these were the Mega Banette's moves, when it kept making Knockoff over and over again until it finally used Destiny Bond, which I assumed was the culprit for making my whole computer kill itself. But without another thought, I chose Knockoff. But before my brain could process what was going on, Blank, or now Banette, slowly turned her head to look at the other side of the screen. I almost choked on my spit. They were looking directly at me. I have not seen her face in this much detail, since the sprite on my ID card was smaller, and during Pokemon battles the playable trainer's face aren't shown to them facing the other direction. The more I looked at Banette, the more I realized how heartbreaking her expression was. They looked at me like I was their last hope, their last option. Their eyes pleaded for help, and I didn't think that they could be achieved with pixelated facial features. They kept looking at me. The Oddish wasn't any different. It just had to be the same happy little sprite. Seeing it so happy and Banette so upset made it seem like Ghosty just became more self-aware. They kept looking at me in despair, like they were waiting for me to help them. But I couldn't. All I could do was watch, helplessly. I subconsciously shrugged at them like they were a real person, and that they could see me. A few more seconds passed before the background of the battle became completely red. Banette's face became more and more horrified. I was so distracted by the background changing that I hadn't noticed that Banette's appearance had changed too. Her normal eyes had red and black slits for pupils, and there were yellow zippers all over her body. I heard an 8-bit thump, and the word Enigma was in the corner of the screen, but still in the background, so it was partially covered by the box with Oddish's name and stats. There were more thumps. Enigma. Enigma, 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 Enigma! It kept repeating until it covered the whole screen. But even then, I kept hearing the thumps like it was continuing off-screen. It felt like everything was happening at once. I couldn't catch up with what was going on. Everything felt like it was happening so very fast. Was this the Mega Banette's doing? Everything seemed normal up until my trainer character encountered it. Or was this mod really what I thought it was? Was this some sort of sick joke? I felt sort of bad for Banette, despite them being a fictional character. I was really starting to like having them as my avatar. I just watched in horror as she seemed to be tormented. After a while of waiting and watching for something to change, as I was sitting there completely baffled, the thumping noise repeated so fast that it sounded like a machine gun, which came completely out of the blue, which made me violently flinch. The game was glitching, the noise was loud, and I tried closing the program, but my screen completely froze and the noise just continued. I was stuck seeing Banette like this. I didn't want to wait, so I just spammed the X button in the top right corner of the game's window. The window faded slightly white and my arrow turned to a blue loading circle. Banette_mod is not responding. Windows can check for an online solution. If you close the program, you might lose information. I moved my mouse to try and click the option that closed the program, but before I could do so, my computer screen flickered a little. A bunch of small green pixels appeared in various places on my computer monitor before the pop-up disappeared and the game snapped back to normal. The fans in my computer kept blowing really fast, but eventually it slowed down as it cooled down from overheating. The game was back at my starting point in 5 colons. Everything looked normal again. Why is this game screwing up my computer so much? Not only is the computer overheating, but the graphics card too? That would explain the pixels. Maybe the overheating is getting to it. I tried moving Banette around, and everything seemed to work like normal. I wandered to Route 1, and the game started to stutter occasionally. However, it started getting worse once I realized I was officially within Route 1. The game didn't only stutter, but it was practically running at 4 frames per second now. Even the music cut out occasionally, ruining the peacefulness of what was originally supposed to sound like. I walked past the tall grass, already knowing what Pokemon were there, and I wasn't sure how much worse the game would get if I got caught in a Pokemon battle. I didn't want to risk my computer overheating again, it might damage it even more. Plus, I wanted to get to the next area. To think this mod was so awful that I couldn't even get past Route 1, I scoffed, thinking to myself. I eventually found an area that allowed me into the next part of the game. My screen faded and a few of the green pixels were scattered all around my screen, but disappeared once it faded back. I'm really gonna have to get this checked when I am done here. Once it faded back, I noticed that the quality has gotten a lot worse, and it was more saturated as well, and it looked like as if the whole thing were a horrible JPEG image. As I walked, Banette's sprite started to jitter a little, and it definitely didn't look as smooth as it was just a moment before. The sprite would sometimes jump up a little, or maybe jerk to the right. I was already getting sick of this. I just wanted to play a normal Pokemon game, and I thought that downloading a mod would make it even cooler, but instead I shortened the lifespan of my computer. I guess that's what I get for downloading a file off a third-party website instead of buying Pokemon games from the original creators like a normal person. I continued walking throughout the game, but the more I progressed, the more horrible the game's graphics were getting. Some of the assets were glitched out by now, and it eventually got to the point where I couldn't even recognize what they were supposed to be anymore. The pixels were out of whack, and now the colors were bright and had turned up into confusing mixes of red, blue, and yellow. Any dialogue boxes that came up weren't even dialogue boxes anymore, and the words that appeared on them manifested somewhere else on the screen. I couldn't even see where the poor ghosty was on the screen anymore. The music sounded like it was muffled, and the tunes in it were nothing more than just scratchy sounds. I kept going, but it was no use. My computer was already burning hot again, and that's when I knew I needed to stop. I closed the game and waited for my computer to cool down again before completely deleting the game and emptying the trash bin. What kind of freak would make a game like this? So that was Banette_mod. And I've been really itching to read a traditional Pokemon creepypasta. There's just so many of them in comparison to, I think, any other video game franchise. I think the only ones that could possibly rival it are perhaps Minecraft, Roblox, maybe the Grand Theft Auto games all put together. But I do want to get some of the flaws out of the way. Firstly, there's just a lot of weird details. These are not especially damning. Like, you could explain these in the story, but it just kind of made me a bit confused when I heard it. Like, the Quilava using Tackle on a Banette shouldn't happen. Banette's a ghost type that's immune to normal types. I'm pretty sure Mega Banette is as well. I guess they don't really explain that it's also a ROM hack. I know the in-perspective character isn't super technically literate. Like, they're not really sure how emulation works all that well. It's like they got confused by the keyboard controls, which is fine. You know, it works well for the character in the story, but I felt like having them be a bit more computer literate and like knowledgeable about Pokemon emulation, perhaps ROM hacks, would help with the immersion and descriptions a bit more, as like giving praise to the new Mega Evolutions, or this and that, just a little bit of technical knowledge to know what's going on. I think that also bleeds into a bit of the descriptions, where it's like, and then this happened, I don't know what's going on, guys, gotta close the task manager. But it's not like it ruins it, it's just something I would have preferred, not even necessarily complaint against the story. Now we gotta talk about the Banette here. So, it's very much like a ROM hack, and I think the story's priority is setting up like an original character, Do Not Steal, in form of the blank, like the unnamed lady trainer who gets possessed by the Banette. Like, when the Banette uses Destiny Bond, it seems to have like possessed this character, and now she becomes the Banette and like nothing happens. Like, you can battle with her, which kind of reminds me some of those like 16-year-old Pokemon Fire Red and Emerald mods. People would just mod the game crazy and like tell stories with it. It's kind of a bad description, I don't know what the term is, but if you're my age, you probably remember like really weird ROM hacks made by people in the basement just doing whatever. And I think the story does kind of capture that vibe of like someone just making a weird, inexplicable hack. You know, it's not haunted gaming, it's no ghost in it despite there being Banette. It's just a weird ROM hack, and the story is done once the author realizes, alright, time to delete it. Which, I mean, it's not a super tense ending, but that's what would happen. Like, they would just decide, well, I'm not interested in this anymore, bye-bye, and it's just a weird mod, and it's done with. So you do get points for realism. Also, I will say, very minor complaint, there's no such thing as an 8-bit sound. 8-bit is a visual. That's like saying you had a 4K sound. You know, it doesn't really make that much sense. But so many creepypastas describe audio with visual terms. Like, I heard a purple noise. It's a very minor thing. I mean, I've read enough creepypastas in my life to get kind of used to it, so whatever. It doesn't really matter. Now, I do want to discuss the character here, because I saw there's a character sheet at the very bottom. This is very much kind of setting up like an original character, Do Not Steal. I think they're being shipped with someone. I think there's like a ship going on. I think. I don't know. I don't really know much about it. I don't really know much about what this community is going, so if this is like a famous mod for some like Friday Night Funkin' related nonsense, please tell me, because I need to know. But it was a decent story. You know, there is some descriptions that were a bit like, huh? And some things that kind of bothered me. And in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't really that scary. It was just kind of detailing someone's experience with an obscure mod that just exists for the purpose of the story. But I have such a soft spot for Pokemon creepypastas that I really can't hate it too much. I like this story. And I'm glad there's like a whole wiki for these I've pulled up. And I want to read a lot of these. Maybe not like every week, because I think a lot of people would get really annoyed if this was just reading Pokemon stories. So maybe like every other week. But it's neither here nor there. But why don't you brothers and sisters, tell me how you felt in the comments section below? Because I haven't seen anyone talk about this one. It's kind of, dare I say, obscure. But anyways, yeah, go tell me how you thought below, and have a lovely rest of your day.